Before climbing back into the module, he says something like a promise that we'll be back, and not long from now. That was December 1972. A child born on the same day Cernan spoke those words is now over 50 years old, has grandchildren, and we still haven't gone back. In the next few minutes, we'll talk about why we went, what we did there, why we stopped, what happened in the meantime, and whether we're finally close to setting foot on the moon again. To understand why we stopped, we first need to understand why we went at all. The Apollo program was never purely a scientific project. It was a child of the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union were racing to see who would reach the moon first. A public display of power between two superpowers. And the Soviet Union struck first. In 1957, it launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite in history. A few years later came Yuri Gagarin, the first human being to ever travel into space. From the American side, the scoreboard looked grim. The first satellite, the first animal in orbit, the first man in space. For a while, it seemed like the Soviets were winning every milestone that mattered. The moon became America's chance to flip the story. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and made one of the boldest promises in political history. The United States, he said, would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. At the time, that goal sounded almost absurd. America had only recently sent its first astronaut into space. The technology barely existed. The rockets were still being developed. And yet, the challenge was accepted. By the late 1960s, the space race had become far more than science. Every launch was watched by millions. Every success became a political victory. Every failure became a national embarrassment. The moon wasn't just a destination anymore. It was a scoreboard. And then, in July 1969, the United States crossed the finish line. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and the cameras carried that image around the entire world, the US achieved exactly what it had spent the better part of a decade chasing. It got there first, and in the eyes of the world, the race was over. And here's the interesting part. Once you've had your propaganda triumph, every mission after that becomes harder and harder to fund. NASA's budget, at its peak in 1966, was about 4% of the entire US federal budget. By 1972, it had already dropped drastically. That number is hard to imagine today. Modern NASA receives only a small fraction of that share. Apollo wasn't simply expensive. It was one of the largest peacetime technological undertakings in human history. And here's something we often forget. When people talk about the Apollo program, it sounds like humanity was on the moon for decades. The truth is very different. The whole thing happened in a surprisingly short window, a little over 3 years between the first landing and the last. But in those 3 years, something happened that looks less like one big event and more like a gradual climb. So it's worth stopping for a moment and walking through it, mission by mission. It begins in December 1968, before we'd even landed anywhere. Apollo 8 was the first mission where humans left Earth orbit. Before that, every astronaut, without exception, had stayed in a loop around their own planet. The 3 men aboard Apollo 8 became the first human beings to see the whole Earth. hanging like a small blue ball in the blackness. And during that same mission, something happened that would later become one of the most famous photographs in the history of photography. Earthrise. Earth rising, seen from lunar orbit. Astronaut William Anders took the photo almost by accident. While the crew orbited the far side of the moon, the side no human had ever laid eyes on before. For the first time in history, human beings saw their home not as a country, not as a continent, but simply as a small, fragile world floating in darkness. Many astronauts would later say that view changed them forever. This wasn't a landing. It was the rehearsal for the entire idea that the moon was reachable. A few months later came Apollo 10, a mission that often gets overlooked, because on the surface, it didn't achieve anything new. But it was actually one of the most psychologically intense missions in the whole program. The crew brought the lunar module down to within about 15 kilometers of the surface, close enough to see every detail of the terrain, where the next mission would land just weeks later. And then they did something that required nerves beyond normal. They turned around and pulled away, back into orbit, without touching the surface, even though they were physically only minutes from making history. Apollo 10 was the dress rehearsal for the first landing. Everything was ready. All that was left was to actually do it. And then came July 1969. Armstrong, Aldrin, the first landing. This is the moment the whole world knows the step, the words, the flag, the photographs. There's no need to go into it at length here, because this story has already been told 1,000 times. It's enough to say this was the point where the impossible became fact for the first time. And then comes something interesting. Apollo 12, and almost nobody remembers it. This is the paradox we already touched on. The second mission landed with such surgical precision that the crew ended up just a few hundred meters from an old unmanned probe, Surveyor 3, which had landed there years earlier. Engineering-wise, that's remarkable accuracy. But the world had already seen its first landing, and the second one just didn't carry the same thrill. People want the first, not the most precise. Then came the mission nobody expected, Apollo ESEN. Second day of the flight. Routine procedure. And then an explosion. An oxygen tank ruptures. Power drops. Oxygen leaks out into the void.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Moon landing canceled, not by choice, by necessity. Now the question changes. Not how to land on the moon, how to get home alive. The lunar module, built to keep 2 men alive for 2 days, suddenly becomes a lifeboat for 4. Cold, limited water, rising carbon dioxide. Mission control calculates, recalculates, improvises solutions out of spare parts. Literally, tape and cardboard. For filters never designed for this. Hours become days. And finally, splashdown. Full crew, alive. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon, but it became the greatest survival story of the entire space age. The next mission, Apollo 14, carried a different kind of weight, psychological. This was the first landing after the disaster. and the whole world watched with a little more anxiety than usual. The mission went off without a hitch, and in doing so, it restored the confidence the program had lost after Apollo 13. And finally came the last three, Apollo 15, 16, and 17. By this point, the program wasn't racing anyone anymore. The Soviet Union had long since abandoned its own ambitions for a crewed landing. So these missions could finally focus on science. Enter the lunar rover, a small electric vehicle that let astronauts travel kilometers from the landing site. Suddenly, exploration wasn't about one spot anymore. It was about an entire region. More rocks, more samples, more instruments left behind. And on December 11th, 1972, with the landing of Apollo 17, the chain came to an end. Eugene Cernan became the last man to leave the lunar surface without knowing that his words about a quick return would be remembered for the next 50 years and more. And now, we get to the most interesting part. Not the conspiracies, the question. Because 50 years later, it's still standing. If the moon mattered as much as we were told, why did we stop? Think about what that question really means. Not why we paused, not why we delayed the next mission, why an entire generation grew up without seeing another human being walk there, why the greatest journey of the 20th century simply ended. This is exactly where all the theories begin. Some people say we were never really there. Others claim we found something we weren't supposed to find. Some believe the moon is more dangerous than it looks. But once you strip away every theory, one uncomfortable fact remains. The last human being left the moon in 1972. And after that, nothing. And that fact is strange precisely because of what came before it. Apollo wasn't a failed program. It wasn't a technological dead end. The missions became safer. The science became better. The astronauts stayed longer, traveled farther. In many ways, Apollo was improving right up until the moment it stopped. Not one missed launch, not one canceled mission. 5 decades. Picture it a different way. Imagine humanity crosses the Atlantic Ocean for the very first time. The whole world watches. Then it turns around and says, "Okay, that's it." And for the next 50 years, no one crosses that ocean again. It sounds absurd. That's exactly why the question keeps living. But the truth is, the moon isn't close. It just looks that way. At its nearest, it's almost 400,000 kilometers away. Every kilogram of equipment has to be launched from Earth. Every drop of water, every breath of air. And if something goes wrong halfway there, there's no emergency landing, no rescue helicopter, no nearby hospital, just space. Beyond low Earth orbit, a completely different reality begins. Radiation. Enormous costs. Every mission is a gamble at the edge of engineering and luck. Apollo 13 reminded the world of exactly that. One damaged oxygen tank nearly turned 3 astronauts into a permanent monument in deep space. And if a single malfunction could do that in 1970, every future mission would carry the same risk. And yet, something in us still isn't satisfied with that answer. Because people don't like empty spaces in a story. We like endings that make sense. And the Apollo program doesn't really have one. No final battle. No disaster. No dramatic event. No official declaration that the moon no longer mattered. The launches simply became fewer. The budgets became smaller. Public attention drifted elsewhere. We just stopped one day. And one of humanity's greatest adventures quietly faded into history. And maybe that's exactly why so many people are still searching for a deeper explanation. Not because the evidence points there, but because it's hard for the human mind to accept that the greatest adventure of its century could simply end because of politics, budgets, and lost interest. Maybe because we expect history to end with a climax, a victory, a defeat, a catastrophe. But Apollo ended with something much stranger: success. And perhaps that's exactly why the question still survives today. Back to reality. After Apollo, NASA didn't stop working, it just shifted focus. And the next 50 years would be written not only with engineering achievements, but with two of the heaviest tragedies in the history of spaceflight. The Space Shuttle era began spacecraft that orbited low Earth orbit, never traveling farther than about 600 kilometers up. Technologically impressive, but a fundamentally different ambition from setting foot on another world. And then, on January 28, 1986, everything changed in a moment. The Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off that morning in front of millions, including school children watching live, because on board was a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, who was meant to become the first civilian in space. 73 seconds after launch, the shuttle broke apart. In the sky, all 7 crew members were killed. The cause, a simple rubber seal, hardened by the cold air that morning. A small component that couldn't withstand the chill. The program was grounded for nearly 3 years. 17 years later, history repeated itself with a different face. February 1st, 2003. The Space Shuttle Columbia was returning from a mission that had already succeeded during re-entry. It broke apart. 7 astronauts. 7 again. The cause, a piece of insulating foam that broke off at launch, struck the wing, and tore a hole that went unnoticed until the fatal moment of return. Together, the 2 disasters claimed 14 lives and cost the program nearly a decade of progress. But between the tragedies came real triumphs too. The International Space Station was built, a joint project with Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. Continuously inhabited for more than 2 decades, one of the longest unbroken human presences beyond Earth in history. The Hubble Space Telescope launched in 1990, and for more than 3 decades, it changed how humanity sees the universe without ever leaving orbit around our own planet. Attempts to return to the moon technically began in 2004 with the Constellation program. The goal, a new lunar module, new rockets. But in 2010, it was cut due to budget overruns and delays. Half a century, 2 lost shuttle crews, 1 working orbital outpost, and no one set foot on the moon again. First, China. China's space program successfully landed rovers on the far side of the moon in 2019, and in Arli Arsith, brought back the first samples ever collected from that side of the moon, something no other nation has achieved. China now officially targets a first crewed moon landing before 2030 using a new spacecraft called Mengzhou. and a lunar lander called Lanyue. The plans also include a permanent lunar base built jointly with Russia. Second, the private sector. SpaceX and companies like Blue Origin have driven down the cost of launching into space, making a return to the moon financially realistic for the first time in decades. And here we arrive at something that's no longer a plan, but an event that already happened. On April 1st, 2026, NASA's SLS rocket launched the Orion capsule with 4 astronauts aboard: Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. A 10-day mission around the moon and back. The mission was called Artemis II. For the first time since 1972, for the first time since Apollo 17, humans traveled beyond low Earth orbit. On April 10th, the capsule splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. The full crew alive, healthy, and holding a new record, having traveled farther from Earth than Apollo 13 ever did. Half a century later, humans near the moon again, but not on it. For the astronauts aboard Artemis II, the experience carried a strange weight. Every crew that had traveled beyond Earth's orbit before them belonged to the Apollo era. Every one, the last of those missions, had flown more than 50 years earlier. For a brief moment, it must have felt as if a door long sealed shut had finally opened again. Next comes Artemis III, planned for late 2027. A mission that won't land on the moon, but will test SpaceX's and Blue Origin's lunar landers in Earth orbit. The real long-awaited landing is expected with Artemis IV, sometime in early 2028, if everything goes according to plan. Because in this race, no one is certain who will get there first. China is targeting 2030. The US is targeting 2028. Technical problems, delays, and revised schedules have been the norm for both sides in recent years. But one thing is already certain. For the first time in 53 years, humans are flying toward the moon again. The question is no longer whether we'll go back. The question is, who will set foot there first again? 50 years ago, the last man on the moon said we'd be back soon. We didn't go back, not because we couldn't, but because we chose to do other things instead. Sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't hidden in space. They're not on the moon. They're not in the unknown. Sometimes the biggest mystery is why humanity abandons its own dreams. Let's go back to Eugene Cernan, December 1972. His last words before leaving the lunar surface, a promise that the return wouldn't take long. More than 5 decades have passed. An entire generation was born, grew up, grew old, without seeing a single human being walk up there again. Now, with the Artemis program and new targets for the end of this decade, we might finally be close to the moment that promise gets kept. Will we see the next footprints on the moon before 60 years pass since the last ones? We'll find out soon enough. Thanks for being with us. Until next time.